Well, it was just last week that Alberta formally submitted its proposal to build an oil pipeline to the southwest coast of British Columbia for tanker exports to Asian markets. Alberta is pitching two southern routes. Both follow along the path of the existing Trans Mountain expansion pipeline. Now, while technically the proposed pipeline is a public-private partnership, only 10% would be in the hands of the Calgary-based Pembina Pipeline Corporation. The rest remains in the hands of various levels of government. So just how viable is this pipeline? Dennis McConaghy is a former executive with TransCanada Energy Corporation, and he joins me now. Dennis, always good to see you, sir. Thank you for giving us some time today.
Good to be with you.
So this proposed pipeline is a private-public partnership, but it's mostly public, at least on the concept phase right now. Is this a viable project as advertised in your view?
Well, let's make 2 points. The first is this pipeline is going to have to get the support, ultimately, of the 5 major oil sands producers to commit volumes to this pipeline. In addition to that, those same 5 entities have got to come to some kind of understanding with essentially Mark Carney, but also Danielle Smith, about the fate of pathways, who's going to ultimately pay for it, and whether or not the existing levels of carbon pricing, or where they may rise to in the future, what the impact of on their own competitiveness of those future volumes. All of those things still remain to be seen. I do not expect this pipeline to ever be built on spec. A breakthrough on having those 5 major oil sands producers commit volumes, which is to say they're going to pay the tariffs over the long haul of perhaps 20 to 30 years, that is still to be accomplished. And it's one of the great issues that will play out over the next 4 months as we move towards the October period, where a determination essentially by the Carney government that this project's application deserves to go to the next step, a step which would imply that the project has not just the support of the federal cabinet as a major project, but also some fundamental economic viability that is expressed by this commitment of the people who will produce the oil.
So walk me through this, because when you listen to the politicians who have been championing a pipeline to the West Coast for years and years and years, it all sounded as simple as if there was a pipeline, the oil would flow. And now it's obviously more complicated than that, right? Because you have to commit money to capital to boost production, and then there's the cost of pathways. So what do you think it takes to get those 5 major oil sand companies to agree to boost the production? Let's start there.
Well, some of us have never said that. Some of us have never said, just build the pipeline and the supply will follow. The competition for capital exists within all 5 of those companies, whether it is entities like ExxonMobil and Phillips that will have to do an allocation process with all the other global opportunities they have, or entities that are entirely Canadian controlled like CNRL, Cenovus, Suncor, who still have to compete for the investments to produce the incremental oil with other things they could do that could be more, could give higher returns to their shoulders, i.e. like share buybacks. Having said that, the biggest constraint to their commitment, I think, still is the additional costs imposed by the decarbonization mandate and the potential for open-ended carbon taxes. If those risks can be reduced or allocated to other people, then those entities will commit to the pipeline. And once they've committed to the pipeline, they really are implicitly going to be committed to making the investments to generate the supply. Or they just choose to find other things. And when I said other opportunities, those can be other pipeline opportunities, such as the pipeline to go south that is championed by South Bow, expansions on the Enbridge system. There is still a great deal to be done in terms of having their fundamental commitments to this project. And I believe that is still the biggest unknown as we move through the summer.
Right. No, and I certainly hope you didn't take my question as implying you had said it was as simple as build it and it will happen. But you know the political debate that's out there, because you have always cautioned that it's not as simple as people make it think and may think. And you pointed out the decarbonization agenda. It is still, even with the governments taking the lead proponent role here, it is still no pipeline, no pathways, no pathways, no pipeline. I mean, how big of an obstacle is this carbon capture hurdle for those oil companies? Because this is a big move for the Liberals on their climate agenda, and this is sort of like what they want back, it would seem to me, to make this viable.
Well, an equally valid question is how big a hurdle is $130 a ton carbon taxes in 2040. But just on the decarbonization issue, I think they have been fairly clear, and even as recently as mid-month of June, the CEO of Cenovus made some very pointed remarks about how they had reconsidered, the financial viability of them taking commitments on pathways. I think Mark Carney Tuesday night alluded that there was some form of understanding, it hasn't been disclosed publicly, between Alberta, Ottawa, and the 5 producers about pathways. But it has always been an open question: who's going to carry the bag of pathways? Are the governments going to pay for this and the producers are absolved of that cost? Or who's going to bear it? Because as long as that is still a demand of Mark Carney, it could still be very problematic in terms of the competitiveness of generating those incremental volumes. And that is the one area in particular that I'm the most interested to see what kind of tangible progress they make, because they have yet to really table in concrete terms publicly where they stand about that resolution, other than the somewhat cryptic remarks he made Thursday night.
The taxpayers and the nationalization or using public funds to build the pipeline, and then maybe finding some way to let the oil companies skirt the obligations on the decarbonization side. That's maybe an easy sell to shareholders and boards of directors. Strikes me that might be a bit of a harder sell to the public and to voters, right? That's a lot of nationalization of risk and cost there, don't you think?
Let me just make this point. If there was some way of Mark Carney relenting on his obsession with decarbonization or reducing the risk of open-ended carbon taxes, then those supply commitments, I think, are more likely to be achieved. And if they are achieved, then it is more likely that positions in this pipeline wouldn't have to be borne by the Canadian taxpayers. They would attract private sector capital to actually construct the pipeline through conventional financing, because the project would have been evidence that it has strong producer support, and with that being done in the context of a set of climate policy that is not so onerous that they cannot make those commitments. So ultimately, I don't see that this has to end up in the hands of the Canadian and Alberta taxpayers. But again, that is going to be one of the questions that plays out over the next 4 months.
Just as a final point, I guess, Dennis, is what is your level of optimism here? Because it was a rather celebratory announcement that I watched last week, but these are not insignificant things that need to be dealt with for this to be viable, for this to be a full pipeline, for this to be worth it, right? So what's your level of optimism that they can get this thing done the way they outlined it on Thursday?
I have said consistently for 4 or 5 days that I still have some level of skepticism that this thing will culminate by the end of, or the beginning of October, which is a date that also has a lot of relevance for other things unfolding in Alberta, that they will have the kinds of producer commitments that we can all look at this. Yeah, this can be a viable project. So I think they have work to do. Let's put it that way. And my optimism on that is probably not much better than 50-50, but I hope I'm proven wrong here.
Dennis McConaghy, former executive with TransCanada Energy Corporation. We always appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.